he threatened Su-chan, saying, "If you lose, I'll toss these 3 siblings into the water to feed the water monsters." Meanwhile, Su-chen thought to himself that the 2 brothers seemed to be in some sort of frenzied state. Were they injected with drugs? He wondered. A loud voice boomed from the side. "Begin!" It was the man with the eye patch, still holding the drumstick in his hand. He released the chains, unleashing the beasts on Su-chen. Both mutated demons charged at him, their rage evident on their faces, veins bulging on their heads and mouths wide open, ready to attack. In this horrifying moment, Su-chen remained steady and calm. As soon as the demons reached him, he swiftly delivered a karate chop to the first one's neck, dropping it instantly. The second demon got a powerful slap across the face, causing blood to splatter from its mouth. With just one hit, Su-chen knocked out both demons. Zami, on the other hand, burst into tears, believing her brothers had been killed by Su-chen. Duan-ya held Zami close, comforting her and gently reassuring, "Don't worry, they'll be fine. They're not dead." The eye-patched man was not pleased with how things had turned out. He yelled, "How is the fight already over? Damn it, I wasted 2 doses of my medicine." Then, with a dismissive wave, he added, "Forget it. They were just 2 useless trash anyway." With a creepy smile, he turned to Su-chen and said, "I'm in a good mood today. If you hand over all your supplies, I'll pretend this never happened." Su-chen shifted his gaze at the eye-patched man and asked, "But why should I hand over my supplies to you?" A man from the eye-patched man's team spoke up angrily. "You're new here, aren't you? Anyone entering Science and Technology University must follow Boss Liu's rules to keep things in order and weed out freeloaders." The eye-patched man added, "We don't support freeloaders here. If you want to stay, you need to earn contribution points. You can earn them by handing over resources or finding supplies." A voice emerged from behind the enemies, causing them to turn in fear. It was Boss Guo. The sight of him sent a chill down their spines, and their voices began to tremble in his presence. Boss Guo radiated an immense amount of energy, with his aura turning the atmosphere red and his eyes sparkling with a fierce red light. He looked at Su-chen and said, "If you want contribution points, why not work for me?" Duan-ya, standing behind Su-chen, was shocked as she saw a massive figure approaching them while sitting on a throne carried by his slaves. One of the female slaves was tied in ropes beside him on the throne. Boss Guo, a fearsome, monster-like figure, loomed over them. The slaves trembled under the weight they were carrying, and when one of them tripped and fell, Boss Guo reacted instantly. Without hesitation, he threw his spear at the fallen slave. The spear pierced through the man's chest, and with a scream, he lay lifeless on the ground. Su-chen and Duan-ya were shocked by the inhumane scene unfolding before them. Boss Guo, with a calm smile on his face, remarked, "As you can see, we're short on people. You're just in time to replace him, especially that bunny girl over there," referring to Duan-ya. He continued, "I'll give you a can of meat and unlimited instant noodles every day. How about it?" He grabbed the female slave by the head, grinning as he looked at her. She screamed, clearly in pain from his strong grip. Boss Guo added, "It's the apocalypse now. Industrial production has ceased. I'm making a big sacrifice for you. Who knew I'd be so bored with these guys already?" The eye-patched guy, standing beside his 2 muscle-bound henchmen, added to what Boss Guo had said, "Our boss is offering you a generous deal. I advise you to accept it." One of the muscle boys standing by mumbled, "Great. If the boss gets a new woman, he'll let us have fun with the previous one." However, Boss Guo's mood shifted abruptly as he detected the unpleasant smell emanating from their mouths. With a sharp tone, he inquired, "What have you guys been eating?" The boys, sweating and paralyzed with fear, had no answer. Eating meat without Boss Guo's permission was a serious crime, punishable by death. Realizing that their lies wouldn't work, they dropped to their knees, begging, "We won't do it again. Please give us another chance. In the future, we'll give any food to you first." Boss Guo cut them off, shouting, "Shut up! The smell is killing me! Did you eat shit? Stop talking and get away from Mel!" Meanwhile, Su Chen, standing with Duan Ya, noticed that he could see through Duan Ya's mental control. It seemed like it didn't affect him at all. All the henchmen stood there, dumbfounded and bewildered, confusion written across their faces. They were sweating and trembling, trying to muster up the courage to speak. But before they could utter a word, a sudden, excruciating pain gripped their stomachs. Blood began gushing from their mouths, leaving them clueless about the cause of this sudden agony. Desperate and panicked, they had no choice but to flee, running off to heed the urgent calls of nature. Seeing the pitiful state of his subordinates, Boss Guo felt no pride in their performance. Instead, he grew increasingly frustrated and disappointed, his thoughts shifting to replacing them with more capable individuals. It was clear to him that new blood was needed to maintain control and uphold his standards. Meanwhile, Su Chan was intrigued. Despite not sensing any special abilities from Boss Guo, the man exuded a powerful aura that couldn't be ignored. It puzzled Su Chan. How could someone without any discernible abilities still command such an overwhelming presence? Moreover, under Boss Guo's influence, everyone snapped out of Duan Ya's mind control. This left Su Chan even more curious. What kind of person is Liu? He wondered. Judging by the behavior and caliber of his subordinates, Liu couldn't be anything good. The thought lingered in Su Chan's mind as he tried to piece together what kind of leader could command such a ruthless and chaotic group. As Su Chan pondered the idea of killing them all and continuing his search for the rat mutant, a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Boss Guo asking, "So, what do you think about my offer?" Guo's question pulled Su Chan back to the present, forcing him to focus on the decision at hand. Su Chan declined the offer, leaving Boss Guo visibly disappointed. Guo knew that having someone like Su Chan on his side would be incredibly valuable. Instead of pushing for a confrontation, he simply said, "One day, you'll come begging to me." With that, Guo called one of his men over and instructed him to take the front positions. Without another word, he turned and left, leaving Su Chan and the others behind. Duan Ya felt a deep sense of guilt in that moment. She apologized to Su Chan, admitting, "His strength was too strong and my ability was useless against him." Su Chan responded calmly, laying out the facts. "It's not your fault. If these guys didn't die after eating the water ghouls' corpses, then something's definitely not right. We need to be careful." His tone was firm but reassuring, emphasizing the need for caution moving forward. A man approached Su Chan from behind, saying, "You've angered the guards. They won't let you go. Su Chan, you have to come with me now." Surprised that this person knew his name, Su Chan asked, "Why are you helping us?" His curiosity was piqued as he tried to gauge the man's intentions. The man pointed a finger at himself and said, "It's me, M. Puan. I'm Tianyu's roommate. We met when you last visited the school, remember?" Guo's sinister grin widened as he said, "In the apocalypse, women as hot as her are very rare." His words carried a chilling tone, reflecting his twisted desires. Several hours later, Monsieur Puan led Su Chen and Duan Ya to another part of the university, heading toward the central building. The structure was connected by wooden bridges, creating a makeshift network over the flooded areas. In one of the rooms, there was a makeshift medical station with a drip, though their supplies of medicine were limited. Despite this, they had enough to treat some of the more urgent cases. They carefully laid the girl's brother on the floor atop a blanket and connected him to the drip. As the fluid began to flow, the man's eyes squeezed shut, his teeth clenched, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. Duan Ya sat down on the floor next to him, her expression serious. She rested one hand on her knee and placed the other on the man's chest, trying to offer some comfort. She turned her head away slightly, focusing her gaze elsewhere to maintain her composure. With a steady voice, Duanya explained to the girl that her brother was no longer in mortal danger, at least for the moment. The girl, who was standing nearby, let out a sigh of relief. Overcome with gratitude, she smiled and thanked Duanya, saying, "You're the best." The room they were in was crowded with other people, some sitting, others trying to sleep. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Su Chen, with his hands casually tucked into his pants pockets, walked over to Monsieur Puan and asked, "Do all the students live here now?" Monsieur Puan, who was standing protectively next to Su Chen, nodded. "Yes," he replied. "Regardless of whether they are men or women, everyone who's still alive has taken refuge here now." She paused, her eyes drifting to Su Chen's calm expression. Then, with a serious tone, Monsieur Puan continued, "Because Brother Tian used to help everyone, this place is considered their territory from the field department." Su Chen's gaze remained steady and calm as he listened to him explanation. After a moment, he asked, "Which field department?" His curiosity was piqued, and he was keen to understand more about the social dynamics within this refuge. As they were talking, a man with a rifle on his shoulder appeared. "Our field department is strong. Even if we face tough opponents, we can handle them," he said with confidence. Su Chen looked at him, curious about who this man was. The man came closer. He had a rifle, several knives on his back, a diving mask, and sturdy armor. He looked ready for anything. "Are you interested in joining us?" he asked Su Chen. Before Su Chen could answer, Monsieur Puan recognized him. "Tian-Wu!" Monsieur Puan shouted, looking excited. "Guess who I've brought back?" he said, glancing at Su Chen. Su Chen looked at Tian-Wu, surprised. For a moment, he couldn't believe it was really him. Tian-Wu, filled with emotion, quickly hugged Su Chen. "I thought you were dead," he said, relieved. "But you're still alive." Seeing each other again, Tian-Yu decided they should have some drinks since he had just returned to the field department and had a few days to spend with them. As sweat dripped down his forehead, he turned his head and, with a surprised look, wondered what was happening. Behind them was Duanya. Upon seeing her, Tian-Yu was stunned and started sweating even more. He knew her. She was famous at their University of Science and Technology, known as the Cold Goddess Duan. As she walked toward them, she put her hands behind her back, struck a seductive pose, and said those were things of the past, irrelevant to the present. Tian-Yu panicked, his mouth open in shock. He pointed at her and, with a confused look, asked Monsieur Puan how the legendary goddess could be standing in front of them, dressed as a bunny. Monsieur Puan, covering his ears with his fingers and sweating, stared at her, unsure how to respond. Tian-Yu asked Monsieur Puan if she was really Duanya from the Faculty of Medicine, noting that it wasn't surprising she was so beautiful. Duanya then approached Su Chen, placed her hand on his chest, and looked into his eyes with a loving gaze. She blushed and told him that she wanted to change her clothes, as dressing like this in front of the students was too embarrassing. Su Chen, smiling, put his hand on her waist and agreed it was time for her to change. Puan clenched his fists in anger, jealous and frustrated as he watched the goddess Duanya with Su Chen. Tian-Wu, shocked, even started bleeding from his nose out of sheer disbelief and fury. Tian-Yu led them to another room, dropped his backpack on the floor, and apologized for the mess. He told them they could sit anywhere and that Duanya could change her clothes in that room. As Duanya entered the room and thanked him, Su Chen noticed how luxurious it was and couldn't help but be a bit surprised. Monsieur Puan turned his back, feeling envious of how Tian-Yu had used his contribution points. Tian-Yu, leaning against the wall and touching his mask, remembered that they hadn't brought any luggage and wondered where Duanya would get clothes to change into. Su-chan shifted the conversation and asked if their missions were usually dangerous. Tian-yu, tapping his mask, replied that every mission was dangerous. He noted that Su-chan and Duan-ya looked clean, indicating they hadn't faced the harsh trials of the apocalypse. He asked them to stay put and suggested they join his team so he could protect them. Tian-yu then reminded Su-chan not to show off too much in the future, questioning why he let Duan-ya dress like a sexy bunny. He couldn't understand what Su-chan was thinking and reminded him they were in the apocalypse. Su-chan, turning back slightly with a calm look, assured him not to worry, saying he would take good care of her. Tian-yu approached Su-chan, gave him a playful punch on the head, and told him to keep his word. He reminded Su-chan if he had forgotten who had been bullied back in high school and hadn't dared to stand up for himself. Tian-yu was the one who had helped chase those bullies away. As Duan-ya entered the room and began to change out of her clothes, Tian-yu warned Su-chan that Captain Gu was not a good person. He mentioned that the women Captain Gu liked never had a good ending, especially beautiful women like Duan-ya. According to Tian-yu, Captain Gu wasn't going to give up easily. While Duan-ya was undressing from her bunny costume, someone sneaked up behind her. The person pulled out a knife, placed it near her neck, and ordered her not to move. It was number Duan-ya, terrified, asked who she was and what she wanted. Num leaned closer, stuck out her tongue, and revealed that Captain Gu had sent her to help organize Duan-ya's accommodations. Num explained that Duan-ya, being a beautiful girl, naturally couldn't stay with the others. Feeling nervous, Duan-ya tried to stay calm and assured Num there was plenty of space, so there was no need for her to worry. But Num disagreed and insisted that the captain specifically wanted Duan-ya elsewhere. Duan-ya's eyes began to glow as she activated her power, telling Num once again that she wasn't leaving. In response, Num's eyes also started to glow, and she began sweating, struggling to resist Duan-ya's power. Duan-ya commanded Num to drop the knife. Overwhelmed, Num stepped back, confused, and released her grip on the weapon. As she stood still and looked at the ground, Duan-ya realized she could only control her for a short time. Taking advantage of this moment, Duan-ya moved toward the door to find Su-chan and let him handle the rest. At that moment, Nam began to regain control of her movements. She gripped the knife tightly, and instead of attacking Duan-ya, she stabbed the knife into her own hand. The intense pain caused her to clench her teeth and scream, but it also helped her break free from Duan-ya's mind control. Duan-ya looked back, shocked, unable to believe that Nam would injure herself to wake up from the control. With a murderous look, Nam advanced towards Duan-ya, preparing to finish her off. She pushed Duan-ya against the wall with her elbow, holding the knife ready to strike. She glared into Duan-ya's eyes, furious that she had almost fallen into her trap and thought Duan-ya was a strange and dangerous girl. Duan-ya began to sweat, terrified, realizing the situation was getting worse. At that moment, someone started knocking on the door, asking what was happening and why there was so much noise. Seeing this, Nam quickly covered Duan-ya's mouth to keep her from responding. She glanced at the door with a serious expression, knowing this could be trouble. When no one responded, the person outside decided to force their way in. Seconds later, Su-chan burst through the door. Nam immediately let go of Duan-ya and turned to face him. She asked if he was looking for trouble and then gathered herself to attack. Su-chan stood still, not moving a muscle. Just then, Tian-yu appeared and shouted for Su-chan to be careful. Hearing Su-chan's name, Nam's expression changed drastically. She was shocked and began to sweat, unable to comprehend what was happening. As she got closer, she realized that the person who knocked down the door was indeed Su-chan. Her eyes widened in terror, and she remembered the horrifying events at the engineering university. She recalled how the monster, Su-chan, had massacred everyone with his sharp claws, grabbing their leader by the neck and smiling sinisterly. Nam quickly realized the man in front of her was not just any enemy. He was a demon in human form. She stood frozen, overwhelmed by fear, unsure of what would happen next. Suchan took an offensive stance and stared at Nam with a piercing gaze, ready to attack. Despite her own history of killing, she felt an intense intuition that attacking Suchan would mean her own death. Trembling with terror, she sought a way to prevent this. Instead of attacking, Nam threw herself to the ground, placing both hands on it and bowing her head. She prostrated herself before Suchan, showing him a sign of submission. This unexpected gesture left everyone in shock. Suchan remained still, staring at the ground in silence. Duanya, confused and surprised, watched the scene unfold, unable to understand why Nam was behaving this way. Nam, with her hands and legs on the ground, crawled toward Suchan. She looked up at him with a mixture of fear and submission, calling him master and pleading for him to punish her. Tianyu, sweating and confused, turned his head back, puzzled by why Nam was calling Suchan master. With both hands in his pockets, Suchan's body started to emit a powerful pink energy. He looked at Nam with a serious expression and asked, "Who is your master?" Nam called Suchan master and, with a sincere look, asked if he didn't trust her. Without hesitating, she took off her clothes, holding them in her hand, and smiled, asking what he thought of her now. Completely undressed, Tianyu couldn't help but stare, his mouth agape, blushing as he pointed at her, confused. "Why did you undress completely?" he asked, baffled, wondering if Suchan had such strong tastes. Nguyen, standing behind Tianyu, was also taken aback, his mouth open in shock, blushing at the sight. Nam stared at Suchan in silence, her mind working on another plan. While everyone was distracted by her actions, she pulled out a smoke bomb and threw it on the ground, creating a thick curtain of smoke. Realizing her intention to escape, Tianyu and the others quickly reacted, but the smoke screen grew thicker. Nam took this chance and dashed toward the exit, but just as she thought she could escape, a hand suddenly appeared and grabbed her, stopping her in her tracks. She panicked, realizing her plan was failing, and clenched her teeth, a look of terror on her face. Nam looked at the hand gripping her neck and began to sweat, unable to believe what was happening. The one who had caught her was Suchan. With one hand in his pants pocket, he used the other to strangle Nam. His expression was cold as he asked if she thought she could escape so easily. Panic filled her eyes, and she quickly pleaded, begging him not to kill her. She reminded them of the girl they had rescued a few days ago, revealing that the girl and her two brothers had been taken to the Colosseum. If Suchan killed her, they would never find out what was really happening. Suchan hesitated for a moment, then stopped strangling Nam. He stared into her eyes and calmly told her he didn't care about any of it. Without another word, he used all his strength to throw her out of the building. The glass shattered, and Nam's body plunged into the floodwaters below, waters that were teeming with monsters. Tianyu turned to Monsieur Puan, sweat forming on his brow. "Who is the girl she mentioned?" he asked. Monsieur Puan, now visibly shaken, explained that the girl's name was Son Sami, and she had two older brothers. He was certain that Captain Gu's men had taken them away. Suchan looked at them calmly, thinking. Tianyu clenched his teeth and realized that this situation was becoming dangerous. Monsieur Puan approached Suchan and asked with urgency, "What are we going to do now? If we don't rescue them soon, the mutant rats could kill them." As Suchan's body began to emit a powerful energy, he looked at them with a calm gaze. Even though he knew this university was the origin of the mutant rats, he asked which rats they were talking about. Turning his back to the group, he began to walk away, intent on investigating further. Duanya appeared beside him, still dressed in her rabbit costume, ready to follow him wherever he went. Duanya began following Suchan closely, not wanting to be left behind, for fear that Captain Gu's men might come back for her. Suchan was planning to head to the Colosseum. Meanwhile, not far from their location, a laboratory stood. Next to it was a large metal cage, inside which was a platform where the girl's two brothers were tied up. The girl stood near the platform, and in front of her sat Captain Gu, surrounded by several of his men. As he looked at the girl, he laughed and taunted her, saying that if she was willing to enter the arena, he might consider releasing her brothers. The girl's two brothers were suspended from ropes, their arms bound tightly. One of the brothers, a man in gray, gritted his teeth and warned his sister not to trust Captain Gu, urging her to flee. Captain Gu turned to the man with a smirk and told him it was too late for any of them to escape now. The girl stood defiantly in front of the platform, holding a wooden stick with both hands. With a determined look, she declared she wasn't going to run away and asked Captain Gu if he truly intended to release her brothers. Captain Gu, pointing at her with a finger, smiled and told her that if she managed to survive, he would set them free. At that moment, the cage behind her opened, and a giant mutant rat emerged, advancing toward her. The sound of the cage opening made the girl sweat with fear. She slowly turned her head back to see what was behind her. As she turned, she saw the massive rat, its mouth filled with sharp teeth, ready to attack. Before she could react, the mutant rat lunged forward and sank its teeth into her arm. She clutched the wooden stick with her free hand, screamed in agony, and shut her eyes tight. The rat bit down harder and violently shook her body from side to side, causing excruciating pain. As she was attacked, memories of her brothers flooded her mind. She remembered the time her brother had found many mushrooms. Sitting on the ground next to her, he proudly showed off the mushrooms he'd gathered. She had questioned whether they were poisonous, and her bald brother, who sat beside them, took it upon himself to test them. He ate a few mushrooms, deciding that if he didn't die, they would be safe for Zami to eat. The girl and her other brother watched in shock, mouths agape, wondering if he had lost his mind. It didn't take long for the mushrooms to take effect. The bald man's arms fell limp, his mouth opened, and foam began to pour out. Delirious, he muttered about seeing red umbrellas in the sky. Her other brother, realizing the mushrooms were poisonous, urged him to spit them out immediately. Days later, when her brothers were preparing to leave for a mission, they reassured her. One of them, with a cheerful look, promised that once they completed their task, they would earn contribution points and buy food so she wouldn't go hungry anymore. The other brother, smiling, assured her they would all have a delicious meal together when they returned. Back in the present, the sight of the mutant rat mauling their sister filled her brothers with panic. Tears streamed down their faces as one brother, terrified, shouted for her to run and not to worry about them. The other, drenched in sweat, pleaded for her to flee, reminding her that she still had a long life ahead of her. Xiao Mei gained courage from her memories of her brother and told her brother, "Hang in here! I will save you!" At that moment, she hit the rat in the eye with the stick she was holding, and the big rat fell to the ground, making Xiao Mei cry as she looked at her brothers. The rat came from behind her, placed its paw on her waist, and she collided with the ground. It seems like the little kid was trying to save her Captain Gao, who muttered and laughed, saying trash like should not be alive. "Why is this happening? We just wanted to live. Why?" One of the brothers asked. Xiao Mei, while crying, asked, "Who will save us now?" And at that moment, Suchan appeared and killed the big rat in no time. It must have been a relief for them to have someone come to their rescue like that. Tianyu shouted, "This kid is too impulsive." It sounds like Tianyu was a bit surprised by the kid's actions in the scenario. Sometimes impulsive decisions can lead to unexpected outcomes. Suchan brought his hand up to his face, gazing at it with a contemplative look. He assessed the remains of the mutant rat he had just defeated and concluded that it was nothing special, just large, without a core, and seemingly different from the usual mutants. He pondered for a moment, considering why it felt unlike the other common mutants. Captain Gu, observing Suchen, sneered and called him a bastard. With a wicked smile, he gave his men the order to open another cage. Following his command, the men quickly opened the cage, releasing several giant mutant rats. He said to Suchen with the grin on his face, "You want to die, ill fulfill your wish." Suchen, unbothered, simply placed both hands in his pockets, looked down at the ground, and stood still. While Suchen was surrounded by the mutant rats in the arena, Tianyu and Monsieur Puan seized the opportunity to rescue the girl's brothers. Monsieur Puan, who was behind them, lifted one brother onto his shoulder, supporting the injured boy with a firm grip across his chest. The brother gritted his teeth and closed one eye in pain. Monsieur Puan turned his head, noticing his expression, and couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him. Tianyu, who was in front, placed the bald brother's arm over his shoulder. As he walked, he glanced at the wounded brother and suggested they rest for a while. With a comforting smile, he called out to their little sister. Hearing his voice, the girl turned around and, upon seeing her brothers alive, she started sweating from relief. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling with concern. Duanya, standing beside her, looked at her brothers. Seeing their weakened state, she felt a pang of sadness. The girl's brothers forced a smile to reassure her, not wanting her to worry. The bald man, grateful, thanked her sincerely. "If it hadn't been for you, we would have lost our lives," he admitted. The girl then approached Duanya, giving him a heartfelt hug. With a sincere look, she revealed, "It wasn't me. It was Suchen who saved us." Duanya looked down at her, surprised but remaining silent, taking in her words. Meanwhile, outside the arena, a figure emerged from the water, dripping wet and leaving a trail of water behind. It was Nam, who had somehow survived and returned. She soon put on her clothes and entered a nearby laboratory. Inside, a man with blue hair and glasses sat, enjoying a glass of wine. He was her boss. The blue-haired man looked at a screen with a calm gaze and asked, "Is this Suchen, the special research material you mentioned?" "Nah," crossing her arms and looking down, standing behind her boss, confirmed with a simple, "Yes." She added that by using Suchen's genes, they could investigate the problem of genetic instability in the apocalypse. Back in the arena, the mutant rats, released from their cage, were closing in on Suchen. The air was thick with tension as the rats, larger and more vicious than before, prepared to attack. Suchen, still with his hands in his pockets, continued to stare at the ground, his expression unchanged. Na's boss, observing the scene on the screen, explained to her that these mutant rats had been created using the latest technology. "They are bigger and fiercer than any we've produced before. If this guy dies here, then he doesn't deserve to be my special experimental subject." However, as he continued to watch the screen, something caught his eye. The boss's calm demeanor shifted to one of surprise. He couldn't help but be somewhat astonished, beginning to wonder, what is this power? As the three mutant rats emerged from their cage, preparing to attack, Suchen reacted swiftly. In a blur of motion, he drew his dagger and charged, slicing through the rats with precision. Within seconds, their bodies were cut into pieces, and their agonized screams filled the air. The bald man, witnessing Suchen's prowess, was left in shock, unable to believe how quickly the rats had been dispatched. Tianyu, standing beside him, was equally stunned, unable to reconcile this display of power with the Suchen he knew. Captain Gu, initially disdainful, was now taken aback. He hadn't anticipated Suchen's ability to handle the mutant rats with such ease. After the battle, Suchen calmly cleaned his shirt and inspected the rats' corpses, noting their lack of core crystals, which further distinguished them from typical mutants. Suddenly, a loudspeaker crackled to life. Nam's boss, having activated the system, addressed the arena with a calm but commanding voice. he announced that Suchen was the very test subject he had been seeking and ordered Captain Gu and Tian Yu to capture him and bring him to the laboratory. Captain Gu, realizing Tian Yu is also a member of Field Department and his allegiance to Suchen, he was pleased with the unfolding drama, finding the situation both intriguing and amusing. With a terrified expression, Monsieur Puan urged, "Duanya, we need to leave before things get worse. If you don't go now, you might not be able to escape." Duanya, concerned for Suchen, replied firmly, "I won't leave. As long as Suchen is here, I'm not going anywhere." Tian Yu, in a state of panic, the boss's order meant that Suchen would be taken for experimentation, either dead or alive. The thickening mist in the arena added to the growing tension. Tian Yu, with a worried expression, felt trapped between his loyalty to Suchen and the dire circumstances. Tian Yu, overwhelmed and with a lost gaze, was caught between his duty and his brother's safety. Suchen, observing Tian Yu's distress, inquired about the situation. Tian Yu, with a somber look, explained that their boss, Leon, had developed a potion early in the apocalypse to enhance people's strength. This potion, however, drained their life force over time. Tian Yu expressed his regret, apologizing for the predicament they were in. Captain Gu, finding the situation entertaining, eagerly anticipated the confrontation. He prepared his mace, mocking Tian Yu and declaring it was time to get serious. Just as he was about to attack Suchen, Tian Yu intervened. He leaped into the arena, delivering a powerful kick to Captain Gu's face, sending him crashing to the ground. Captain Gu, stunned and enraged, struggled to get up, shouting about being challenged. Tian Yu, with a fierce aura, confronted Captain Gu. He declared that the boss was merely a rat using the potion to control others and decided to fight, disregarding his own life. Suchen, confused by Tian Yu's actions, watched in astonishment as Tian Yu, once again, prepared for a battle. Duanya and Monsieur Puan were equally shocked by the turn of events. Suchen, with a cheerful look, thought about Tian Yu's unwavering determination. Tian Yu, facing Captain Gu, expressed that anyone who harmed his brothers would have to face him. The confrontation escalated. Captain Gu, wielding two maces, attempted to crush Tian Yu. Despite the powerful strikes, Tian Yu, though injured and bleeding, fought back fiercely. Gu, revealing that he had anticipated Tian Yu's betrayal and had been using level 1 potions against him, pressed on with the attack. Tian Yu, though gravely injured, continued to resist with unyielding determination. Captain Gu, with a malevolent grin, prepared to end the fight with an electric charge emanating from his mace. Just as the charge was about to reach Tian Yu, Suchen intervened. He kicked the maces, causing Captain Gu to lose control, and mocked him, asking if he was truly invincible. Duanya, Monsieur Puan, and others watched in shock as Suchen managed to injure Captain Gu, a feat they hadn't thought possible. Leon, observing from the laboratory, was captivated by what Suchen has demonstrated. He was captivated by the extraordinary events. He marveled at Suchen's abilities, recognizing him as a key to perfecting humanity and offering him a place in his groundbreaking experiment. Leon's sinister plan involved using rat genes to create an army and conquer the post-apocalyptic world. As Suchen expressed his disdain for this plan, a startling sound interrupted the scene. An assassin emerged, aiming a gun. The bullet missed Suchen but struck the old man, who transformed into a grotesque creature, a sumo wrestler with enhanced strength and regenerative abilities. The once familiar Gu had now transformed into a terrifying monstrosity. With extra eyes grotesquely sprouting along his arms and razor-sharp teeth lining his distorted mouth. Leon, filled with arrogance, taunted, "Now you see the power of evolution. You're up against a level 3 evolved being. Know your place and serve me." Suchen, unfazed by Leon's bravado, responded with defiance. He raised his middle finger provocatively and retorted, Turning people into monsters might seem impressive, but it's far from something to be proud of. With that, Leon gave the order, and the grotesque creature that Gu had become let out a terrifying roar before charging at Su Chen. It morphed into a Sonic-like figure, rolling toward him with blinding speed, intending to crush him. The scene was so alarming that everyone around watched in horror, fearing for Su Chen's life. Duan Ya, amidst the chaos, shouted, "Su Chen, be careful!" Despite the looming danger, Su Chen remained composed. As the electrified monster approached, he stood firm, calmly raising both hands as if to halt the creature. "Stop," he commanded with unexpected authority, and surprisingly, the monster hesitated. Su Chen seized the moment to mock the situation further. "Do you really think that adding 2 batteries to a weapon will electrocute someone?" he sneered. To drive his point home, he forcefully shoved the power source into Gu's mouth. In his confused and enraged state, Gu misunderstood the gesture and bit down hard on the object. What followed was a catastrophic explosion. The power source detonated inside Gu's mouth, resulting in a deafening blast that echoed throughout the arena. The force of the explosion sent shockwaves through the air, and everyone watched in stunned silence as the nightmarish entity that was once Gu was engulfed in a blinding flash of light. The battle had taken an unexpected turn, leaving everyone in awe of Su Chen's audacity and quick thinking. After defeating Gu, Su Chen turned around with a confident smirk, only to be met with the anxious expressions of Tianyu and Duanya. "Did you actually defeat him?" they questioned, their voices filled with disbelief and concern. Leon, who had been observing the battle, was astonished by Su Chen's unexpected use of explosive pins to deal damage. However, as he had previously warned, the Class B medicine Gu had taken granted him potent healing capabilities. To their horror, Gu's face began to rapidly heal, his human-like features shifting into a grotesque, monstrous form. As Gu continued to morph into something even more terrifying, undeterred, Su Chen ascended into the air and launched a powerful punch at the monstrous Gu. Yet it quickly became clear that a single strike wouldn't be enough. Without missing a beat, Su Chen unleashed a flurry of precise blows, moving with the skill and grace of a seasoned martial artist. As he fought, he reflected on how few people were aware of superpowers in this post-apocalyptic era, which fueled his determination to keep his abilities a secret. To maintain his cover, Su Chen used his powers to obscure the battle from the onlookers, causing Duan Ya to fret as the dust clouded their view. "What's happening?" "I can't see a thing," she exclaimed in frustration, while Su Chen marveled at his own clear line of sight, wondering if the others were experiencing the same clarity. Meanwhile, Leon, ever the schemer, questioned what Su Chen had in store for the end game. Su Chen, aware of the creature's regenerative abilities, knew that as long as Gu continued to regenerate, Leon's twisted research would remain intact. A sinister chuckle escaped Su Chen as he considered the unique attributes of his powers. Beyond his obvious combat abilities, Su Chen had prepared a variety of other surprises. With a dramatic flourish, he unveiled his ultimate secret weapon, a massive heap of rocks, iron, and steel sourced from various construction sites, all destined to be crushed into a sticky mess. This was Su Chen's ace in the hole, a strategy he had meticulously prepared to ensure that even the most powerful of foes would be brought down. As the battle raged on, Gu stood frozen, at first anticipating a feast, but instead faced with a disordered jumble of debris. Outside, the tumultuous sounds of battle echoed through the air, though the source remained elusive. Tianyu and Duanya exchanged bewildered glances, questioning where the noise originated. Meanwhile, Leon, drenched in sweat, muttered that Su Chen must be conjuring some demonic trick. As the dust began to settle, a mountain of rubble appeared, and a lone figure emerged from it, leaving Tianyu and Duanya even more perplexed. They saw a towering mound crafted from various materials like iron and steel, Transforming the battlefield into a formidable fortress, Su Chen sat, calm and untouched, like an unstoppable ruler, while the failed efforts of his enemies lay buried under the rubble. Leon, now stripped of his usual bravado and gripped by fear, shouted desperately, "I don't care who you are or how you brought this debris here, but if you dare treat me like a dog, I'll make sure you die without a burial." He frantically pointed at the surrounding monstrous figures, sensing his doom. Su Chen, still calm, cracked his knuckles and replied, "I'm not planning to let this slide either." Duanya and Mpuan realized they were surrounded by Ratmen once lab subjects, now monstrous creatures. Suchan quickly informed them, "Leon is their primary target. We need to eliminate him to end this chaos." His voice was calm but urgent, emphasizing the importance of their next move. Suchan directed Duanya and Mpuan to handle the mutated Ratmen. As Duanya processed the command, she realized that failing to prove her worth could cost her everything. Determined, she and Mpuan reassured Suchan, promising they would manage the situation with the mutated rats. Before leaving for the research lab, Suchan instructed them, "Call out loudly if you need any help." His parting words were firm, showing his trust in their abilities while remaining ready to assist if necessary. As soon as Suchan departed, Duanya, Mpuan, and Tianyu rallied the team. Duanya informed them that she would focus on controlling the rats while they concentrated on eliminating them. Despite her determination, she faced a significant challenge. She had never controlled so many rats at once before. However, her resolve to stay close to Suchan motivated her to persevere. Meanwhile, Leon, observing the unfolding events from the research lab, watched with growing concern. He knew that if the situation escalated, the traitors would soon become food for the Ratmen. Just then, a report came in. Suchan had incapacitated the building's security personnel. He was puzzled when he realized the girl he had freed was the same one he had met before the apocalypse at a bar. He never anticipated running into her again under these circumstances. Acting quickly, Suchan smashed the container to free Yun. As soon as she was out, she regained consciousness and was overjoyed to see him. He comforted her, promising to get her out of the situation. However, Yun mentioned she was hungry. Suchan reassured her, "Once we're safely away, I'll find you something to eat." Just then, a voice interrupted the moment, commanding Suchan to release Yun. An ice arrow flew toward him, but Suchan quickly intercepted it with his bare hand. Infuriated, Leon demanded, "Remove your filthy hands from her!" "She's the woman I've chosen." Suchan, taken aback by Leon's ice abilities, retorted, "Do you think you're just shopping for merchandise?" Leon sneered, replying, "In the apocalypse, ordinary people are nothing but ants. Someone with the power of evolution like myself is destined to rule the world. It's an honor for her to be with me." His arrogance was palpable, and his words dripped with a twisted sense of superiority. Suchan realized that Leon was indeed the lunatic the rumors had painted him to be. At that moment, Yun appeared, and Suchan embraced her tightly, reassuring her, "'Twill never leave you again." As he comforted her, Leon's anger flared, unable to contain his fury. He charged at Suchan, shouting, "Let go of her! She's my woman, you bastard!" Suchan tried to fend Leon off with a kick, but Leon dodged it effortlessly. Suddenly, Yun kissed Suchan passionately, surprising him as she whispered, "Who told you to leave me last time? This is what you owe me." After her words, she fell unconscious once more, leaving Suchan to face Leon's wrath. Suchan desperately attempted to revive Yun, but her weakened state prevented any response. Leon's rage intensified as he watched, unable to stand seeing someone else kiss the girl he claimed as his own. Boiling over with fury, he turned to Suchan with a fierce glare and demanded, "How dare you do this? If that's how it's going to be, then you can all go to hell together." With a surge of intense energy, Leon transformed into a grotesque mutated rat, fully embracing his monstrous form. He declared, "Now let me show you the power of a god." Suchan, seething with anger, responded with a single word, "Come." With swift, precise movements, Suchan destroyed the monster's upper body, sending the mutated rat's remains flying across the room. Blood and guts splattered everywhere, a fitting end for such a repulsive creature. As the blood sprayed around, Suchan expressed his disappointment, wondering if that was all the monster had to offer. The creature's pathetic look suggested it had underestimated him, not realizing how overpowering his strength and perhaps his fate truly was. Yun, still vigorously munching on the large piece of chocolate Suchan had given her, glanced at the people downstairs and asked, "Are they your friends?" Her expression was one of disappointment, as if the chocolate hadn't quite met her expectations. Suchan, looking down at her, confirmed, "Yes, they're my friends." Feeling a sense of duty to repay him, not just for saving her life, but for the unimpressive chocolate, Yun grabbed a chair and, with her striking physique, hurled it through the window. The glass shattered as she announced, "I'll handle the situation downstairs." Her volatile nature was now on full display. As Yun stood by the window, strong gusts of wind tugged at the remaining bandages, barely covering her important areas. She gave Suchan one last look and warned him, "Leon isn't so easy to kill. Be careful." Without another word, she leapt out of the window, plummeting swiftly due to the weight of her mountains. Though her bandages were bound to come loose, it seemed the artists spared the audience any explicit fan service. As she neared the ground, a horde of filthy rat monsters was rampaging through the area, signaling the intensity of the battle below. Despite the dangers, Yun dove straight into the fray, determined to assist Suchan's friends who were already caught in the thick of the conflict. As Yun descended through the sky, her size, and particularly the milk jugs, grew more imposing with each passing second. By the time she collided with the structure below, her presence had expanded to such an exaggerated scale that it seemed as though she could supply the planet with an endless stream of her liquids. The sheer force of her landing left a path of destruction, and Suchan's friends on the ground were left terrified, their hearts racing as thunderous crashes reverberated through the area. One of the onlookers, an attractive girl clad in a revealing bunny suit, her curves rivaling even Yun's, was clearly designed to captivate those in need of excitement. Next to her stood an unattractive, bumbling man, still processing the chaos that had just unfolded. Cold sweat dripped down his face as he struggled to comprehend the spectacle before him. Yun, wincing in pain from the harsh impact, caught their attention. The bunny girl, in disbelief, questioned whether she was hallucinating as she stared at the enormous mountains towering before her. Meanwhile, the man stood frozen, his eyes wide in astonishment, as ruined buildings and structures lay in disarray around them. The fallen members of the rat army littered the battlefield, a testament to the carnage Yun's landing had caused. Slowly recovering from her pain, Yun began to move through the battlefield, her colossal form casting a shadow over the bewildered onlookers. The bumbling man, terrified at the thought of being crushed, begged for mercy, his gaze fixated on her towering form and the precariously held bandages that barely contained her figure. His eyes lingered on their color, wishing he could vanish in the face of such overwhelming presence. As one of the filthy rats was crushed beneath Yun's foot, its rib cage splintered into dust, you might have wished it was you in that unfortunate creature's place. Oblivious to what she had stepped on, Yun curiously lifted her foot, inspecting the flattened mess without much realization. Meanwhile, the remaining rats stared at their crushed comrade, utterly terrified by the colossal figure they now regarded as the mother of milk. Before Yun Yun could fully grasp what had just happened, a vicious swarm of rats began pouring out of the surrounding buildings, charging toward her with fury in their eyes, eager to avenge their fallen companion. But despite their frenzy, they were little more than foolish beasts. They raced across the field with blistering speed, spreading chaos. Civilians who were caught in their path desperately tried to escape, but only a few succeeded. Those who were unlucky enough to be in the rats' direct line of attack were swiftly skewered, transformed into grotesque shish kebabs in a matter of moments. The sight of the grotesque, foul-smelling creatures sent Yun Yun into a full-blown panic. She screamed like a frightened child, her voice trembling with terror as the rats swarmed around her. She called out for help, unable to bear the sight or stench of the creatures as they closed in on her. Everyone around her, now fully engulfed in fear, began to flee as Yun Yun, in her desperation, started pounding the ground in frustration. Each stomp from her massive feet sent shockwaves through the area, causing more panic and chaos. The ground quaked violently with each of her frantic movements, and the crowd, overwhelmed by the sudden upheaval, scattered in all directions, hoping to escape the chaotic storm she had inadvertently unleashed. Yun Yun continued screaming at the rats, flailing in panic as she tried to keep them at bay. Despite the others' desperate attempts to calm her down before she trampled them into oblivion, some bystanders gave up entirely, muttering that she was a lunatic beyond help, and began fleeing the scene in terror. Suchan watched the chaos below with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. Yun Yun's antics had become so predictable that her madness no longer surprised him. However, what did astonish him was her sheer power. Her chaotic behavior, combined with the unusual abilities she demonstrated, was more formidable than he could have anticipated. While Suchan stared out the window, thinking of his next move, a sudden noise snapped him back to reality. The rats that had been lifeless moments ago began, twitching and transforming, their bodies grotesquely regenerating. In an instant, they were back on their feet, more revolting than ever, rushing toward him in a disgusting swarm. Their grotesque forms surged forward, but Suchan regarded them with nothing more than contempt, as if they were a mere inconvenience. Despite their sheer numbers, the rats were nothing more than fodder to him. He stood with a calm yet resigned expression, almost amused by their futile attempts. Suchan allowed himself to be engulfed by the swarm, showing no signs of struggle. The rats began merging around him, their diseased bodies forming a grotesque mass. Within moments, they had completely consumed him, but he remained unnerved, as if embracing the chaos itself. From within the writhing mass, Leon's hand emerged like a twisted revenant. The grotesque ratman reappeared, fully reformed, his body as revolting and diseased as ever. He chuckled menacingly, his buck-tooth grin spreading across his foul face. "My body is practically immortal," he sneered, mocking Suchan's attempts to kill him. His breath, thick with the stench of decay, filled the air as he continued, "You really think you can stop me?" Leon reveled in his perceived victory, believing himself to be invincible. Below, the others who had been fighting the swarm were left stunned. Suddenly, the rats ceased their attacks and stood motionless, their bodies rigid like mindless puppets awaiting orders. It was as if their minds were linked to Leon's hive-like command, completely under his control. The battlefield fell eerily silent, with only the sound of Leon's malicious laughter echoing in the background. The battlefield stilled, as every rat, once feral and chaotic, kneeled in eerie unison, all eyes turned toward Leon, who now stood triumphantly atop the ruined building. His grotesque, mutated body gleamed under the dim light, his rat-like features twisted into a smug grin. He reveled in his dominance, surveying the scene as if the entire apocalypse had been leading to this moment. Below, the survivors froze in terror, their hearts pounding, cold sweat trickling down their faces. The bunny girl and her companion stood paralyzed, unable to comprehend the sheer power Leon commanded. His transformation into the Rat King had drained all hope from them, the realization settling in that they were utterly powerless against him. The horde of rats, their foul forms now organized, kneeled before their master, pledging allegiance to the one who gave them purpose. The battlefield that had once been chaotic with battle was now transformed into Leon's twisted court. His reign seemed inevitable, as the survivors were gripped by the grim reality of facing a creature whose malevolent power now ruled them all. The bunny girl and her companions were dumbfounded that the rats were capable of such coordinated behavior. Meanwhile, Yun, furious and undeterred, stormed through the battlefield, swatting away the grotesque creatures and shouting at them to move. Her frustration was evident, especially as their ominous king, Leon, loomed over everything. With bold determination, Yun thrust herself toward Leon, demanding to know where Suchan was. She was ready to confront the so-called Rat King and wouldn't hesitate if he refused to tell her where her beloved was. Still clinging to her desire for Suchan's chocolate, she made her stance clear. Leon, unfazed by the fierce woman before him, chuckled sinisterly. He coldly informed Yun that her precious man was gone, and with a mocking grin, warned her that she was courting death by standing against him. His confidence was unsettling, and Yun, in her rage, didn't notice when the rats began swarming over her, clawing at her skin. She cursed them for distracting her from dealing with their king. Elsewhere, the bunny girl and the other survivors struggled against the enraged rats, the creatures attacking with newfound ferocity, leaving the group overwhelmed and barely able to hold their own. As Yun struggled against the onslaught of rats, desperately shielding her face while leaving the rest of her exposed to their attacks, Leon stood by, laughing at her plight. He was ready to boast about how his rat army would fulfill some cliched evil plan when, suddenly, Suchan's voice interrupted him. From the depths of the rat swarm, Suchan's calm voice cut through the chaos as he casually apologized for the delay in finding the crystal core. Leon was shocked, his disbelief evident as he muttered that Suchan should have been consumed by his rat army. However, he had foolishly underestimated the power of plot armor. With a dramatic flourish, Suchan tore open his own chest, revealing the grotesque fusion of rats and Leon's power. In an instant, he cleaved the Rat King in half, stepping forward with glowing red symbols etched into his skin. His eyes burned with a fierce red light, making him look almost godlike as he held the Rat King's crystal core in his hands. Leon, even as his body lay split in two, could hardly believe what had just happened. Suchan stood victorious, feeling invincible, though deep down he knew he was just another lucky fool. This concludes the latest chapter, and we will continue from here in the next episode. Stay tuned for more action and unexpected twists. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for more epic moments and thrilling chapters.